Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever in the globe you have joined us. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Hatch Global, streaming across Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. We have a remarkable show for you today. I'm joined by our Maker in Residence, Florian, and I have extreme pleasure and honor to introduce you to a remarkable and far-sighted individual, Dale Dougherty, as well, who joined us today. But I'll leave the bigger um, invite for Florian. I just wanted to quickly go through our sponsors who have made this possible and run through them. So starting with Hatch. Hatch is a place for innovation and growth. It is a center of gravity for all things startup. The vision of Hatch is to create the next generation of businesses by transforming the business culture and by providing genuine opportunities for entrepreneurs to experiment freely, acquire knowledge, collaborate deeply, and thrive successfully as a community in a creative space. We are currently based in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and soon to open in Lahore, Pakistan. BYLC Ventures, our other partner, was created to help passionate young founders to get kickstarted with their big business ideas. They do this by providing technical support to validate a product or solution and seed funding to go fast to market. They also provide a set of acceleration support, including a plug and play commercial space to work from, customized business training, and led by a successful CEO turned mentors and a suite of professional support such as legal, accounting, and corporate governance. Seed Ventures, a Pakistan social entrepreneurship and equity development organization, works to support and promote entrepreneurship across various landscapes and verticals, working extensively with micro entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprises, startups, universities, and school children. And also to mention, Pro Pakistani is Pakistan's largest independent publisher for tech, business, and other news, with over 136 million traffic to its site. Can I please ask Florian to do the honors of introducing our guest and taking it forward?
Yeah, thank you, Jeevan. Hello, everyone. And yeah, also from my side, Dale, very grateful you're joining us today. This is a great opportunity for, I would say, all of the community who's here today and listening to learn about, the maker movement and making in general. So Dale, who has been on the forefront of, I would say, of innovation and technology since more over than 30 years. I would say, like starting early off in the 90s with co-founding. One was the O'Reilly publishing company, but then also the Global Network Navigator, one of the first commercial web publication and first website to offer clickable ads. So that was like way back in the days, 93. So later on, Dale coined the word Web 2.0. I think everybody knows it. Everybody's using it. I think, making or coming up or, having this word helps everyone to understand where we are and makes it easier also to pave the way for new technology. But what we want to talk today about is really his engagement in the whole maker movement. So Dale is the CEO of Maker Media. So he started the Make magazine in the early 2000s and published.
Actually, Make Community.
Yeah.
Called Make Community now.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Make Community
Yeah.
now. And it's all about how do you make things, basically? How do you use technology, crafts, how to bring it all together into interesting projects? And so you can all see that on Maker Fairs live when you have the opportunity to go somewhere. So they're now in over 40 countries and 200 places where you can visit a Maker Fair. Probably this year a little bit more difficult with COVID, but I would say probably the most famous Maker Fair was in the White House back in 2014. And so meet Dale. He's the publisher of several books and articles. I think one of my recommendations would be read Free to Make. I think that's a great inspiration if you're interested about the maker movement, if you're trying to get a little bit more insight that's the book to start with, but there are many, many more. And Dale, I just want to start with the first question. That would be like, how do you actually get into making? Because I know you have a little bit more of an IT background, but there must have been something like, yeah, when you started the magazine, also you've been working.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Flora and Jivan. Nice to be here, and welcome to everyone. Well, I think I'm not a great maker myself. Like I didn't start from, oh, I have all these, skills and capabilities I want to share with other people. Instead, I was kind of, in awe of people that had those skills. And so I found lots of people that could do things like build robots and use tools in remarkable ways. And I think one of the things about myself is I think I'm a pretty good learner. And what I wanted to really do with the magazine is help people learn how to do these things, especially with technology. That it wasn't enough to just say someone built something cool. I wanted to know, how did they do that? And it's like, if you have a cooking magazine, you have recipes in it. And so Make Magazine really started as, hey, I want to show you the procedure they've followed to build that so you could replicate it. If you think that's cool, you could do that project, or at least learn from that project to do something similar, And so it's really about sharing the know-how of people really across a broad spectrum of projects. And I guess this is part of, coming a little bit from the open source world and others. I kind of realized that, all these open source software projects are organized as projects. And so, what I think defines a maker in some ways is their project. Whether it's a personal project, a shared project, what are you doing? Not what do you necessarily know or what your degrees are, but what's your project? And that kind of led me to, the magazine is about projects. Maker Faire is about people showcasing their projects and talking to people about them. So, and today we have a platform called Make Projects that you can post your projects on. So, that's kind of a unifying principle, that the unit of work for makers is a project.
Great. Yeah, let me just quickly show a picture, because I have a question to that. I found this one on the Make community website. Your profile, I think that looks like a century egg.
You found that? That does look like a century.
I wonder how that got there. But that's also what I've read, is like, even you were using a lot of analogies in the book about cooking. And I think that's
yes.
What it is.
I do like to cook. I like to garden, grow things, and cook. So I didn't do that century egg, but I do know about them.
Okay. And even Tim already, he was like writing in the forward saying like he probably had the best craft beer at yours.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's seeing how these things are all connected. That how do you learn to make beer, right? Well, yes, you can read about it, and you can today find all kinds of YouTube videos about it. But at the end of the day, you have to do it, right? You have to experience it. And that's what excites me about the making as a form of learning is, use beer as an example, but I could use cheese or bread or anything. It's like, you don't have to be, doesn't have to be a profession for you. It's an exploration, an adventure to learn to make it. And most importantly, this is something I discovered, when you start doing that, like just making beer, you can't help but talk about it. And then you make connections to other people that are making beer, and some, that are advanced, and some who are behind you, and that is how you kind of connect communities together for yourself to, you share a common interest, you're doing something, you're not debating politics, you're actually, hey, what kind of hops are you using? Where are you getting your grain or malt? That kind of stuff. And you share tips and ideas. And I think, you know, there's a geeky side to all of these things, you know, that it's fun to learn all the details. It's like, don't be afraid of that, just dive in. And, you know, this kind of overrides all of this making stuff, but you're going to make mistakes. It's normal. It's part of the process. You know, but sometimes, you know, that obviously you learn from your mistakes, and part of that process is you discovering the kinds of mistakes that you frequently make and seeing if you can improve that.
Yeah.
Dale, let me ask a follow-up question to that. I mean, and we spoke a bit about this, right? There's a whole spectrum of people, right? Those that are just making stuff for the fun and love of it, and those that are making it maybe for their livelihood, and then those who have maybe processed it into a manufacturing facility, you know, and this is such a broad spectrum. And I'm trying to ask if your advice to us who are trying to get people to just make more physical things and stuff like that. We really love engaging with, you know, the people who do it for passion, but how would you recommend us to reach out to the others as well, or do we need to, or does it become that the person who's making it for passion just automatically graduates to making a living out of it because, you know, it's in his best interest to do so? Like, how does that work, or how have you seen it evolve, I guess, globally?
Well, there's probably a couple of answers to that, but one is I have thought of makers as accidental entrepreneurs. Like, they didn't start off with a business plan. They didn't start off with the idea that they were had something to sell. But for instance, they came to a maker fair and they showed off their project, and people said, "That's cool. Can I build that?" You know, Aya Badir was an MIT graduate student at the Media Lab, and she came to a maker fair with her set of blocks that could be connected together to build things, and you know, were aimed at children building electronics. And she said she had a long line of people standing there waiting to try her block. She said, well, you know, maybe this isn't just a school project anymore. I need to make it into something. It became Little Bits, and you know, she went and built a company and managed that for quite a while, and it grew into a pretty big brand. So, you know, I think we don't always know where things lead, and but I do believe it's a bit why education is important, right? Is if we don't develop the skills, we won't be able to take advantage of an opportunity or a problem that we see, and we won't know what to do with that. So in many ways, the people that are building for fun, you know, are also training themselves to do something serious should that they need to do that. And that could mean that they're a partner in someone else's project that is a business, or it could mean that they discover that for themselves. You know, what I've kind of found, and I think the challenge for accelerators in a lot of things is, you know, most of us aren't really good at predicting what's a good business, you know. And I think the most important thing is for people to try. We don't know what will be successful. So having lots of people do things, lots of people trying things out, prototyping it, you know, it is really important. So, you know, it also, you know, as I said, you know, I think people, I really like the idea of making as a form of play, especially for kids and adults. And partly because it gets us in a space where we're not judging ourselves a lot. We're just doing stuff and enjoying it. And, you know, sometimes, you know, people want, when they look at business, they kind of go, well, what's selling right now, you know, or what's successful right now? And so I'm going to do the Uber for dry cleaning or whatever it is, you know, and it's kind of a copycat mentality around being successful. It's looking for a formula. And I think one of the things I think true innovation is there's a level of originality to it. You see something in a new way. And so in some ways, and they're kind of different, you want to encourage people to become innovators, to see themselves as innovators, that they have the tools and mindset to take an idea and make it real. And whether that thing that they make, like it's a product or a service or whatever, for that to become successful, there's a whole other set of skills beyond that. But initially being able to develop that is its own skill set. And I think that's kind of where the predominant impact of the maker community is. And then, I see places that, other people come along to say, oh, that's an interesting approach. And again, the approach could be that you're able to, one of the signature tools of the maker movement is the 3D printer. And in many ways, the community created 3D printing for itself. It was not new. It had been around since 1985, original patents, but 3D printers were something that were industrial, cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, a few design shops or engineering shops had them. But the early MakerBot and things, people began to build off the RepRap project out of England and say, here's an open source project where anybody could build one. And what I found so fascinating is they didn't really know why they wanted a 3D printer. They didn't know what they would do with it, but they thought if they had a 3D printer, they could find that out. And it's kind of true of like the early personal computers. People weren't sure why you would have a computer at home, but the early, the Steve Wozniaks and stuff wanted to have access, to 3D, to a computer, because they wanted to figure out what people like them would be able to do with it.
Just a follow-up question to that. I mean, in Sri Lanka, we get a lot of people who want to make a living because, there are people who, for example, are second-generation carpenters or, come from a second-generation family business, where this kind of maker stuff is like, it's there, and they seem like a population that we should engage in. Is there anything that you would recommend for us to do to engage in these people, get them to maybe come and play as well and innovate with us and co-create with us? Is there something?
So you're saying like people that are carpenter in sort of the trades and things like that?
Yeah.
Well, I think, if you're a tech community and you're looking at the trades, sometimes you just kind of think that's, yesteryear, that's old fashioned, partly it's to understand, there's a lot of skill in that. There's a lot of knowledge in doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that the question is there an intersection where you can see sort of digital tools making a difference in their business? Just like to be able to use digital fabrication tools like CNC machines, how would that change their approach to, what they're doing? So, in some ways, if you can kind of create an opportunity to share among equals, like meaning equal respect for each other. That's one of the things I find beautiful is some of the people that grow up, they're really skilled in coding, for instance, welding to them looks like a dark art, or some other things. So it's actually getting people to cross over a little bit. And I think that happens sometimes just because you strike up a friendship and you encourage people to see that. But, I think at the heart of the maker movement is this idea that digital tools and physical tools and technologies are being integrated and combined in new ways. And so, and often, just to take something like sensors, what happens when you can instrument, a field and measure, say, the amount of water that's being put, on the plant, not just in, out the hose or the irrigation system, so that you have feedback mechanism. There's there's no, you know, you need someone to understand that kind of system, to build that system, and more importantly, maintain it. And it has to be maintained locally. You know, it's not something Microsoft or Google are going to do for you. They might help you do something with the data in the cloud, but they're not, you know, they're not going to, you know, go out and deploy that. And the same with, you know, smarter homes and things like that. You know, I think that there's a lot to sort of ask, how do we apply technology to our local economy, you know, and it's maybe a different perspective than saying, you know, how do I do something here that's globally relevant, right? That's interesting too, and people can, you know, create an app and put it up in the app store and distribute it around the world. That's legitimate. But there's also the idea that technology, like sensors, like microcontrollers, all kinds of electronics, you know, they're getting cheaper, they're faster, they're more capable, but in some ways, the people that make them don't know what they're used for. So that's kind of what makers do, is kind of figure out, oh, I could solve that. You know, I could measure the heat coming in this area and do something as a result of that. And then, you know, you start combining things like AI and other things. So, you know, given a rich data set, like what's happening in the physical world, how do you make decisions about operating something or doing something like that?
Very true. I just had another question about digital platforms, right? And you know, there are platforms like Quirky and Indiegogo, Kickstarter. How important were they to the maker movement, or enabling the maker movement, I guess, commercialize those products and ideas and stuff like that? How are they?
Yeah, well, I think two of them were really important: Kickstarter and Etsy. Kickstarter is, as you probably know, a crowdsourcing platform, and so I always looked at it as you know, if you needed money to build a product, you could raise it from family, friends, community, instead of having to go to a venture capitalist or a bank, or you probably couldn't get money from those people.
Yeah.
But for consumer related products, the people that benefit from it were supporting it. Quirky was a little bit like that, but it kind of had a different model. But you know, they don't like to say it, but it was kind of like pre-selling a product.
Yeah.
Right. Now the challenge was that some of these products couldn't be made, and they didn't raise enough money to make them, because they didn't understand what the manufacturing process was behind it. And so you had some pretty dramatic failures, and you know, when the product turned out to be more complex than they imagined it doing. So the second site was Etsy, which kind of started around the same time that Make got going in you know, 2004 or 5. And you know, it was they were inspired by eBay, but felt like eBay had just become so commercial that there was no longer a community of sellers there. There were just, you know, businesses doing business. And so they wanted to create a community of small sellers, mostly handmade products. And, you know, it tended to work really well for craft products and craft sellers who were making small numbers of things. Yeah. And they made things handmade. And it was sort of an interesting challenge, because often what makers were doing wasn't handmade. I mean, in a sense, it was machine made, but it was just more small batch manufacturing than it was, you know, high volume. So there were some differences there, but it gave people a way that I think, especially as entrepreneurs, to use a big word that I just mean, you know, it gave people an opportunity to sell things and taste, you know, that and see if they like it. and I think it's worked nicely for a lot of people. It hasn't necessarily scaled to, people creating really big businesses or businesses they could sell. But some people have, managed to develop brands and keep at it. And I think it sort of gets to one of the aspects of the maker movement in terms of business is it's kind of deciding what kind of business you want to be. If you're trying to follow a Silicon Valley model, you're looking for a large amount of money that you're going to spend in a short amount of time to discover whether that idea is worthwhile or not. And I mean 3 to 9 months, and if it doesn't work, you shut down and you're done. Yeah. And if it does work, you build a bigger company and you potentially exit, and your investors make money and you make money. Maybe 1 in 10 of those investments work that way for a venture capitalist. But the opposite model is something that I think most of us kind of see all around us. It's like the family business or the small business that people are doing it to make a living. It's not hugely profitable, but it employs people. It's a really nice thing in ways to have a business that generates a couple $1 million in revenue, employs 10 to 20 people, right? Yeah. That's I'm just saying a Sri Lanka or Pakistan could use more of those kind of businesses, rather than the home run of some digital giant that's going to grow out of there. So and if you go back and look at you mentioned the car, how did a lot of these trades or other businesses get started? There was just people finding out there was an opportunity to do something and do it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Florian, do you want to?
Yeah, because that also brings us to the next point. I think that's you have a more global perspective on this whole thing about the community building and where it starts. I think you've been active in Shenzhen, but also in many other places. And what I think is, probably one really super important part of this whole movement are the maker fairs. It's like something, where people can network, where you exchange, where you learn from each other, where you get like inspired. And it's something I think we definitely want to do that too in Sri Lanka. I wonder, on the one side, is that maybe the first step to build a community? And how do you get started with this?
Yeah, well, obviously you're sitting in a makerspace, and that's an important part of that. I started maker fairs before there were many makerspaces. So in fact, some of them seem to grow out of that because initially when we started, it wasn't clear that there were a lot of people that wanted to do this. And I think Maker Faire kind of brought together two groups. One is the makers themselves, who didn't know each other. I mean, they might live in the same city, but someone was doing robotics and the other person was doing ceramics, right? And they didn't see themselves as related to each other. But when they got together, they go, "Oh, that's a cool project. Tell me about it." So that's, the essence of community really is those connections that people find, that they enjoy each other and they learn from each other and they share with each other. And I think Maker Faire facilitated that. So initially when I did it, I was, the initial benefit was just that the makers got to know each other and make those connections. But what also happened very importantly is that we managed to attract a broader public that came to maker fairs, families coming with kids and others who got to talk to the makers and understand what that was about. And I think that helped to generate more makers and more interest in this community, because people that didn't know a lot about it or know about the tools saw the value in it, that people could build stuff that, the original idea around Maker Faire was that people were doing this stuff in private. Even inside a makerspace, sometimes it's hard to figure out what people are actually doing, what's their project. And so getting them to share that, encouraging them, and some, some makers are shy and they don't like to, to talk to people. But sometimes when you get them talking about their project, they become extroverted. They become, empowered to really share their story and talk about the details of their project. So I think maker fairs have, helped to build the local ecosystems in these cities. When we first, our first maker fair in 2005 was in San Francisco, and it was, more people came than I imagined would come, and it just seemed to work well. A lot of these things, though, I don't always know what the business model is going to be, or how to support it, so we have to figure that out at the same time. But people began asking me, excuse me, can we have one in our city? And I said, well, I can't produce all those fairs. I'm a small company. And so we came up with a model for licensing and a playbook, a person write, sort of the guidelines for how to think about a maker fair. And a lot of it, interestingly, was less about event management and more about community organizing. Like, how do you go out and find people and say to them, hey, you're a maker, you belong at this event? And they go, what is a maker? I said, don't worry about it, just come to the event. You do cool stuff, right? And most of that people, especially in a new area, scratch their head and say, well, what the heck is a maker fair? And the reply is, don't worry about it, just come and you'll enjoy it, right? And so we wanted to make it fun. And I think that's actually an important vector for the maker movement is people actually enjoy this, and they enjoy making, and especially for kids, while I think you learn a lot, unless it's fun, you don't keep doing it. It's like playing a game. If you enjoy the game, you'll play it forever. And if you don't enjoy it, you'll stop. So for the magazine and for Maker Faire, we always wanted to make sure the spirit of it was playful and fun and inclusive of lots of people and lots of ideas.
I have a question from the crowd.
Yes.
Randala, thanks Randala for joining. She asked actually two questions. What was your biggest challenge in the initial days of introducing maker fairs? And how is the representation of girls and women in the global maker scene?
Okay, two different questions. Sorry, it's early morning here, so just a second cup of coffee. I think the biggest challenge in the initial days of introducing Maker Faire was, was actually just figuring out the logistics behind it. There's when people have, people are bringing stuff. You can think of it like a farmer's market or something, but instead of produce, you have things that move and things that go up in flames and things that need water, electricity. So, it was building a team to handle that and doing that. The other side I kind of mentioned earlier is initially people don't know what a maker fair is, and I was sort of grateful to the San Francisco Bay Area, the people and the makers that I initially approached. They didn't ask a lot of questions. They go like, just when is it? I'll come. So there's a spirit of generosity and optimism in this that many people want to participate for that reason, and I didn't know that if I didn't try that, I wouldn't have found that to be so, but I've certainly benefited from it, and it grew as a result. Representation of girls and women, I think it's gotten, this is has been traditionally very much a male category, in a magazine and an event. One of the things we did with Maker Faire, though, is we intentionally made it a family event. We didn't want just a bunch of guys showing their gear, in a convention center. We really wanted it to be a family experience, so they would bring kids and women and men would come and find things that they enjoyed. So, and we definitely, have tried to support young women as makers and connect those groups in. You know, it's like, you know, the whole STEM fields. You still have that sort of underrepresentation of women, but I think, you know, my hope is that this is a really broad spectrum of things. This is not just like looking at math or looking at coding. You know, we have wearables, we have things that maybe traditionally appeal to young women, and non-traditional things that can appeal to young women. So I think it's a, you know, it's a good field to play in, I hope.
I have a development question. I think it's about, I think, you know, I think when you started, you've seen kind of the growth of Shenzhen, and I think Shenzhen is very much a huge success story for makers, because you could easily go to the electronics market, you can get pieces really quick, you can assemble, you know, the accelerators there, they can assemble things. Can you tell us a bit about like your journey with Shenzhen and how you've seen it kind of change, you know, change the country, I guess, and is there a hope for countries like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh to look at this model and say, hey, you know, this is something we could do here as well?
Yeah, you know, let's talk about it from a cultural angle to begin with. So, you know, I can give you an example of going to Maker Faire in Shenzhen, and I would see down a row of tables, you know, a dozen drones, right? All made locally, made by that person. And I'd ask that person, well, what's different about your drone, right? And that was like a foreign question. It was like, what do you mean? It's a drone. It works. And so how is it different than that person next to you's drone? It's not. They're both drones. And it's kind of like, you know, it's you know, it's like saying they're both ham sandwiches. You know, they're the same thing. And, you know, and so some of the challenge in China a little bit is because they have both the capacity to make things really cheaply and people that are knowledgeable about doing that, and you know, people want to make a living. They tend to look at things that are succeeding in the market and copy those things and make one of them. And I would say it's wonderful they can produce those things, but on the innovation side, it isn't necessarily new or original. Yeah. Now, and yet, if you went there as an entrepreneur, you'd feel they're you know, completely industrious, hardworking, wanting to, you know, make stuff, and you'd feel like, as an American, you feel like you're on the same wavelength. But and I think it's, you know, to some degree, it's a challenge in a somewhat, you know, state-controlled culture and things like that to think outside the box, if you will, or to take the risks creatively to do something different. And, you know, if I give you an example, if I go to our Maker Faire in Tokyo, and what I see there is some of the most original work anywhere, and often very small and miniature. Their robots have costumes, they're samurai, or they're, you know, everything is a character in some ways, and it's very creative. I mean, one example I always thought I loved was, it was a mattress sitting on the floor, and there was like a monitor up above it, and a guy was lying in the bed, and he had instrumented the mattress so he could play video games without getting out of bed. Like, he could make the characters move by turning left or right or doing all those kinds of things. Now, I don't know what commercial potential is. And the interesting thing in Japan is there isn't often as much energy and interest in turning those original ideas into businesses. a little bit, they have their jobs. They work in large companies. And I've always said there's kind of a paradox in Japan is the big companies there haven't been innovating in quite a while, but down at the grassroots level, there's lots of innovation. If they could sort of find a way to take advantage of that, and break down some of the systematic innovation blocks that they have in their businesses, they could really go places. But if you think about it, Japan has, for a long time had a really robust popular culture, and so that, I think, if you think about technology combined with popular culture, creatively, you're stirring up lots of different ideas and things. And so I think what China is behind in, and I think they'll probably get there, is having that kind of their own popular culture that infuses everything. And so I think it encourages creativity, encourages someone taking a risk, and rewards it. So I think that's the difference there. So, Japan has all the electronics markets, probably not the same manufacturing capacity that China does.
Yeah.
But China's high on the entrepreneurial side, low on the originality side, and Japan's kind of the opposite.
Okay. Very, very, very interesting contrast between those two, and I think you're absolutely right that we need to find our own voice in these places, and it needs to come from the grassroots up, and we truly believe that, and we're going to try our best to try and enable that.
And that's why I think a way to look at the maker movement is kind of this intersection of sort of the creatives and the technologists, of trying to bring them together in as many collisions as possible to learn from each other.
Yeah, right. I think that's also a little bit our perspective from Maker Studio. So that's the name of our makerspace, because it's located nicely like in the building of Hatch. We're just starting operations. So we got now a lot of machines, of course. GIZ, it's the German Development Corporation, was very helpful in that, of course, sponsored. And really looking into, okay, what can we do? We have a CNC sitting there. We have a 3D printer, of course, laser cutter. But then it's also, when you're looking at community, okay, are we talking about interests on the one side, or specific topics of a community, or is the community building maybe then again even more about places or events, or just creating a space, offering a platform basically?
Yeah, a lot of this is trial and error. Almost you have to, before I did a big maker fair, I did some small ones, just events and where the people were already gathered, and I took 20 makers and set up tables and had them talk to people and see, did that work? The interesting thing to me was just having a conversation with a maker was really satisfying, especially if they had the thing that they made there. So because you got to see it, it was a demo of sorts, but you got to ask questions. And I think more makerspaces should do that kind of community meeting. And the other thing is it gave makers a kind of deadline, like they had to get their project ready enough to participate. If one of the habits of some makers is they never finish anything, and it's always going to be next month. So getting them to kind of tie it up and present it is a good thing.
I just have an interesting side take question. What is the? Sorry, Florian. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying. I think I also have a few projects unfinished. That happens.
We don't have to confess.
But I wanted to ask you, Dale, what is one of the coolest, I guess, maker devices you've seen, or maker gadgets that you've seen, just to inspire, I guess, our guys here?
Hmm. Um,
The bed one sounds really good, though. I have to say.
yeah, that's yeah. You know, sometimes it's hard to pull them out of my hat. You know, years ago in the Bay Area, we created a light room and actually a dark room for projects that used, you know, LEDs and lights. And I thought one of them was just like um, had fabricated. They looked sort of like flowers, although they were single. You know, in the dark, in the light, they were just one color, but they were instrumented with LEDs and so when you approached them, they responded to you, right? And if you touched them, it did something else, and it sort of got to this idea of interactivity that I think some of the best maker projects are ones you interact with. They're playful, but they do something as a result of what you do, and so you know, it's just it opened your imagination to what you know, something very different.
Yeah, great. I think we have, actually, it's not really a question, but there's a comment from Shaistia. Ayesha, community building collaboration between makers is absolutely fascinating. I think merging two skills can create such fantastic products, and also introducing them to the ingenuity of this community. Would love to do something like this in Pakistan.
Right.
Would Maker Faire ever want to come to Sri Lanka and Pakistan?
Absolutely. I mean, it's self-organizing. So if Jivan, if you want to organize a Maker Faire, you can do that. You know?
We're in.
And we, you know, we have a program for that and a playbook to help you with that.
Yeah.
And one of the key things that we've thought about, and this would apply to Pakistan, I actually had a group of Pakistani librarians visit Maker Faire, and you know, they were, you know, really interested in this. So librarians, I just want to put a plug in, have generally been one of the great aids of makers and makerspaces around the world. And I'm very grateful for that. But lots of different ways that people can, you know, just use an existing space. It doesn't have to be big, you know, and that was one of the guidance we tried to give people in starting your own. Just start small, you know. 25 makers and a couple hundred people, that's a great event, you know, and next year it'll be 50 makers and, you know, 500 people. So just getting it going is really an important thing. You know, and part of what Maker Faire carries with it is, you know, we're not out looking for, I don't know how to say this the right way, but so much, you know, I look for ordinary people doing extraordinary things, you know, and I want, you know, the kid that looks at that person out and say, whoa, wow, that person's just the smartest person in the world. Only they could do that. Yeah. I want them to think, no, you know, I could do that and I could do it better, right? You know, and so really, it's I love the word that Shaista used, is ingenuity. You know, that's a really great way of looking at what makers do and what communities can do. That, you know, there's ingenuity all around us, and but you know, Maker Faire encourages us to go look for it, you know, and then bring it together. So if you're organizing it, it wouldn't be just the people that show up at Hatch. It would be, hey, where do I see people doing cool things, interesting things, you know, in and around you know, your country, and bring them together. And as a person, she also said, it's sometimes the combination of different skill sets leads to innovation, leads to just oh, you know, how do I use 3D printing in ceramics, you know, or how do I build molds that then I could, you know, use my traditional practices around. So, you know, it's looking for new combinations that I think is really a great thing.
It's actually great that you're hitting on ceramics, because a friend in ceramics industry is asking a question.
Oh, okay.
His name is Anura, and he's asking, and he's got a phenomenal space, very creative. So, you know, he creates these great create ceramics and people kind of hand draw them. It's kind of like it's manufacturing, but it's also, there's a lot of creativity involved in the space. Just to give you some background. But his question is, how would a maker protect themselves from being copied and beaten to market if they had a creative idea or concept? I guess his question is around that.
It's very hard, if not impossible. You know, I think the way I've sort of looked at it is, you know, this is an intellectual property question, and most things get copied, whether they're protected or not. And, you know, getting patents and other things, you know, in a sense gives you a right to litigate, but it doesn't really prevent someone who's much bigger than you from taking advantage of your ideas. I think the way to look at it is, you know, as a creative person, you have lots of ideas. You have an ability to do something first, and people will recognize that. Yeah. I think, you know, I was inspired by the open source, you know, as a way of sharing. And I think, you know, in many ways you could say, well, people, you know, need to make money at this. And I agree they do. But there's also, if you take something like Arduino, which is open source hardware, it's protected in some ways by its name. But its design files are shared, and people do clone it and copy it. They've been able to, you know, still make a go of it. Yeah. So they're not exclusive states, and you know, you might share certain things, but not other things. You know, I wrote a piece once joking about Kickstarter that, you know, Americans, you know, putting up their ideas on Kickstarter and trying to raise money, you know, over 30, 60 days, and then taking 3 to 6 months to build that product. I said, by the time, before your Kickstarter is closed, someone in China has taken your idea and made it into a product, right? Yeah. So, you know, I think in some ways you just have to look at it as a compliment to that you had a good idea and it was worth copying. Often in the grand scheme of things, you're not really competing against some of those people that are copying you. They have different markets and different approaches.
Yeah, I think that there is one example that I find super outstanding that I was reading about. I think I can just show it here, like on the screen. It's called Nomiku. So it's a sous vide cooker where we're back at the cooking topic again. But I think that was like quite remarkable product, like, and also the way like this couple has developed that product. And
they actually closed this year, but Lisa's another example of someone who had an idea for sous vide cooking, which is putting a product like meat in a plastic bag and immersing it in water and cooking it at low temperatures for a longer period of time, like a couple hours. And so they built versions of this. It actually goes back to the egg. Lisa, I write about it in Free to Make, Lisa's story, but they used sous vide to cook a lot of eggs and bring them to Maker Faire, and they were really popular, and people liked it. And so she, you know, and I think this is sort of a good example. Is she wanted to make a device that was affordable to other people like her to do sous vide cooking. That the devices that already existed out there were more expensive and cost more money.
Right. Now we're sorry.
Someone's asking about COVID prevention. I think that's a great story to talk on here, and I know more about the American side, but what fascinated me was that in some ways when COVID-19 hit and it was pretty apparent that our hospitals did not have enough protective equipment for frontline health professionals. They didn't really have a good place to turn, and makers kind of saw a need, and they could address that need. And you had this conditions where worldwide people could share designs like Joseph Proust's face shield, and everybody could take that design, modify it, and then produce it locally. So using the kind of equipment that's in a makerspace, they could satisfy local needs. And I think this is a wonderful model. I call this, and I've written about it on makezine.com, called Plan C, because in some ways Plan A was the government was going to solve this problem. Plan B was industry would solve this problem. And when neither of those two know what they're doing, Plan C is essential, which is a civic response. And a maker response to COVID-19 was an example of a civic response of self-organizing groups getting together and saying, we can not only, in some cases, design these things, we can produce them, and we can figure out distribution. And, none of these people had any experience building medical devices or gear, but they figured it out. And I think, if I look at it, there was kind of 15 years of developing makerspaces and people learning to use this technology. And then this crisis came, and they were prepared. They were able to do things to solve for their local community. And, rather, those hospitals, especially in America, they had the money and the connections to buy anything at any time, the perfect consumer. They always thought of themselves being in the front of the line. When the crisis hit, everybody was in line, and there was no front to it. And so they had no, and I think this is a real dire problem, particularly in America. If you're expecting China to solve for you on this, you're in line with a lot of other people waiting for the same thing. And then China can put an export restriction on that product, and you're not going to get it anyway. So we've had to start asking ourselves, not necessarily how do we make all these things, but how do we have the capacity to make these things so that in a crisis we can deal with it, whether it's an emergency like a hurricane, or earthquake, or in this case, the coronavirus.
Yeah, I think that's very fascinating, especially from a global perspective. It seems like countries like Sri Lanka are in a better position simply because no one wants to rely on one country. They don't mind having an N+1 strategy to their global supply chain. And I think this is the time for maybe countries like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., to start looking at being part of that supply chain and global supply chain. So yeah. I think,
and I think there are just some different rules to look at. Is especially for Sri Lanka it's not necessarily about being big, it's about being flexible and being able to change direction. That is a capacity building thing, rather than saying, okay, we are going to produce this thing and we're going to create a big plant to do that. And we're going to produce millions of it. I think the real thing that we're learning from, even from the COVID-19 thing, is, initially a lot of things were 3D printed, and it's not a very fast way to produce something. So, but you could produce a prototype, you could produce small batches of things. They could be tested and validated in the market, and feedback could come back, and they could easily change. You change the design file and you print a new version. And that design file could go anywhere. But then, once that design was settled on and they just needed volume, they went to other manufacturing processes like injection molding. And, but the people that run injection molding weren't really good at the design and prototyping. So, like, they weren't coming up, they're not businesses, they're manufacturing businesses, they're not really design and development businesses. So, you're connecting those two things together. And I always feel, and this would be an interesting challenge in say, Sri Lanka, it's how do you network that capacity in a country of your size or in cities? How do you know who does injection molding, who does various processes? It tends to, this is a bit your question earlier about some of the trades or some of the other businesses, they are kind of inherently offline businesses that, sometimes you have to call them up on the phone, talk to someone, get a quote, they'll get back to you in 48 hours. It's not like you have an API or an interface to those businesses and say, I need to make 5,000 of these things, in 24 hours. Who has the capacity? That's the kind of world I think that we could enable, though, and saying as a way of getting more business and creating more capacity, because we don't know what the capacity actually is.
Absolutely. I mean, you bring up a wonderful point, right? Because during COVID, we have a lot of apparel manufacturers in Sri Lanka. In fact, it's one of our biggest exports. And when COVID hit, the orders stopped from, I guess because of, quick fashion or etc. People stopped buying. They had so much capacity, but then they kind of shifted into making masks and all these other equipment, which then gave them business. So I think you're absolutely right. If there's a way we could connect that kind of capacity and capability, that would be huge.
Yeah, and let me add that I think one of my philosophical points is more that I think we have to break from the restraints of consumer society, where we just get used to buying everything. And, going back to cooking, I mean, it's like, when you can't buy everything, you have to start making it. And I think more people need to be encouraged and trained, in a sense, to be able to make things at home. And that is a kind of resilience that I think, whether it's necessary from point of view of like COVID-19 or global warming or worldwide recession, it's important that people be able to take care of themselves and use a phrase like self-reliant, not completely on their own, and this is where networks and interdependencies can really help. But it's it's kind of important. I think these skills are important for the next generation, and how are they going to learn these skills except through makerspaces and other communities coming together and sharing them.
So I have a question that kind of follows up from what you've talked about previously, right? You have these huge industries that are available. How important is it to start linking kind of the makerspaces to these industries? And a follow-on question to that would be, I think at one time the 3D printer was going to be this, you mentioned about injection molding, right? It was kind of positioned that it could replace kind of the big manufacturing, et cetera, or disrupt the big manufacturing. Do you see that point coming in eventually, or what is your take or long take on the 3D printer disrupting? I think one of the main things is, can 3D printing start creating, or can you 3D print metals and stuff like that, and can you make it affordable at the same time? Do you think we're very far from that, or have we not reached that kind of cutting point?
Well, in some ways, 3D printing was a victim of being overhyped by a few people. And yet, like a lot of things, even going back to, the web and things, despite that hype, it's more widespread than ever, right? There's more 3D printers in more people's hands today than ever before, right? And so if you actually look at the reality, it's better than the hype. And it's just not, we're not necessarily reading a story a day on something new that's been 3D printed. But, I think we're still experimenting with it, but it's also used more commonly than people recognize to make parts and to do things. I think in the early days we're almost conjecturing what it's good for, and in many cases it's actually being used that way. But it's common. It's not something that they would call out. Its biggest problem is it's still a slow process to print something. And as one of your writers, the materials themselves are not biodegradable for the most part, and so we have some challenges there in dealing with that. But I think you're going to see a lot of. I think material science is going to play a big role in what 3D printing is about, either in using recycled materials or creating new kinds of materials that people are using it for food preparation. Chocolate, cheese. And back to Tokyo, the Japanese have a kind of sweet dessert or candy that is kind of a soft jelly thing that they had a group of 3D printers making those little candies. Just so I think a lot of different things can be done there.
Nathan, who is actually a co-founder at Hatch as well, has asked a question on what developments are you aware of biodegradable material for 3D printing? So,
not specific, but I know there's work on that. I don't know if, there's a scale of that, in terms of what's available now. But I think you'll see more of that happening.
Yeah. Okay.
As I said, the other side is being able to recycle 3D printed parts into the plastic so that they can be reused. And there's a number of devices for doing that. But the material itself is still sort of a challenge.
Okay. I realize that we're kind of running over time. So please kind of ask your questions now. I think, Dale, do you have another 10 minutes to take with us, or
sure?
Are you?
That's fine.
Okay. So please ask your questions going forward. I had one question on space tech, which seems to be an emerging trend. Is there room for South Asian countries to enter this space? Have you seen good examples of this anywhere else? I know we saw an example of mini satellites for $8,000 as an example. Is this something that you look at, or is in your area?
We've had a couple space issues of Make Magazine, and I think I think one of the first ones was some people at NASA broke off and started a company that they realized that they could, almost using mobile technology and other things, that the instrumenting, a satellite or a rocket, could be done a lot more cheaply than they were doing it currently. And I think we had an article on how to build a satellite for $8,000, and while that was a nice idea, it actually ended up developing into a business called Planet Labs, where they launched lots of satellites, and they take photos of the Earth at higher resolution than is otherwise available, and that's a service that they provide. So, it's cheaper, to build these things and to even get them, into space. I think private space exploration, it's a little bit, if you shift your mindset from putting people in space to putting robots in space, that's kind of where it goes. I think NASA launched this week a new rover for Mars. So it's those kinds of things. Is can you get something into orbit, or something going to another planet? What would it do? Interesting thing also is to what are the experiments you would run? For instance, putting something in the orbit of the International Space Station. what in talking NASA, they said, we run, maybe hundreds of microgravity experiments. We'd love to run hundreds of thousands of those experiments. So what would you do with that? And of course, there's places like NASA ran a 3D printed habitat challenge. So an idea of, you'd send larger kind of 3D printers to Mars and you would build a lot of the structures there to do that, rather than send the structures themselves. And again, it's, can you build it out of the materials that are found on that planet? So there's a lot of good areas to work on there, I think, for folks. And, just even weather balloons, near space is pretty interesting too.
Yeah, I can see lots of examples of, like need from agriculture to in developing countries that could use mini satellites, and there's a lot of use cases that could be interesting. So it's definitely something to explore and look at. I have another question from Shehan De Silva. He asks, the ventilator projects that the maker movement spearheaded during this time continues to be fantastic. However, what is your opinion on fusing deep specialist knowledge to these groups, where it is by nature they're organized around large group of hobbyists? Since one of the takeaway from, he's saying, however, what is your opinion on fusing deep specialist knowledge into these groups, whereby its nature are organized around a large group of hobbyists? Since one of the key takeaways from the ventilator projects is that tuning the PID loops in conjunction with the lung models remain an extremely specialist area with direct health and safety concerns.
Mm-hmm. Well, I actually think these communities aren't just, separated like that. I think they actually are projects that, knowledgeable people, specialized people end up joining or participating in. At one count, this summer there was 100 open source ventilator projects, and a man named Robert Reed was keeping track of them and reviewing them. And, he was trying to build something he called VentMon, which is a ventilator monitor that could fit any of those devices and do some of that control and testing to validate how it works.
Yeah.
Some of the challenge we face in those areas is that industrial manufacturers of ventilators own the specs for them. It's not like it was really clear exactly how they should work according to, say, the consumer side or the medical side or whatever. And so getting that out and figuring out what those are. I think UK had an open spec somewhere and people were able to use it, but like in the United States, there wasn't, a public specification. Here's what a ventilator needs to do.
Yeah.
So, getting that information out there, a lot of the ventilators that have, have been successful, I guess, in getting done are relatively, really not intended for COVID-19 patients. They were meant to provide a ventilator for other people so that those ventilators they had could be used for that. And now, and after having a great rush that there would be a shortage of ventilators, it appears that ventilators aren't quite as important as they were thought to be initially for those patients. But I think it kind of gets to, there's a public interest in having these devices available. In America, we had stockpiles of ventilators, but when they brought them out, they didn't work properly. And so some of the challenge was how to repair them. And again, that's a maker problem as well. It's like just because you have them doesn't mean they work. And sometimes they need to be modified, to work properly.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Thank you so much. I know we're almost at 9:45. I could talk to you for hours, to be very honest, but I'll let Florian maybe ask maybe you have any final questions, Florian?
Yeah, also tons. I could also continue for hours. Yeah, it's just, we even went to Mars. I mean, come on, like that's even more fascinating when you're thinking of remotely controlled makerspace and things like that. I think that's definitely, yeah. One of my questions is, yeah, what are we looking at in the future when we talk about makerspace? I think there's like mobile spaces, there's educational, there's a lot there. How do you see the future of
Well,
make?
yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think there's, I want to write about this, but I think COVID-19 has suggested there is a new role for maker spaces that we didn't really organize around initially. Now, I think the traditional maker space, use that kind of a funny word, right? But you know, was organized as a workplace for many people to come and do their own work, right? So I bring my project and I do that. But out of that grew a community of people who had a lot of common interests and capabilities. And what we saw in COVID-19 was not a makerspace where individuals were just doing their own thing, but they were working together as a team and with intentions of solving a particular problem. So I think the future of the makerspace may be to organize around things that need to be done, you know, to help launch something, to help solve a particular problem, to introduce something that, needs to be done. But it requires the coordinated action of a group of people. If we all just go do our own thing, it won't get done. And I think that's a real difference maker for maker spaces. Cooperative work, collaboration, that kind of thing. And to some degree, and this may, you know, it's like tech people sometimes want to go their own way, and that's a good thing. But it's sort of working together as a group and making decisions and following them, you know, following up on them. So I think that's, you know, it's not unlike building an organization, a company, or things like that. You got to decide you're going to do some things and not other things. And I think we probably need more training in maker spaces is how to be a good team, not just how to be a good maker.
Right.
And so I think that's our future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You've been really inspirational, Dale. I'll have you just stop, and I think we'll stop the cast, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
I hope,
I appreciate
I hope
it,
to have,
Florian and
I hope to work with you on Plan C in Sri Lanka as well. So consider us an extension of your Plan C plans, and we look forward to having Maker Faire in Sri Lanka as well.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dale.
Thank you, Florian.